Okay, so welcome to the first meeting of the Environment, Transport, Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Just on our first item of business, to confirm that Mr Pearson was nominated as Chairman-elect at the County Council meeting held on the 8th of July. Can I have a formal nomination?
I propose Mr Pearson, please. Councillor Dan Harrison.
And a second?
Can I second that, please?
Perfect.
Councillor Days Boland.
Perfect. Over to you, Mr Pearson, then.
Thank you very much, everybody. The next job will be the election of the Deputy Chairman, and I'd like to propose Mr James Poland. Could I have a seconder, please?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Janice. And I think that's the election. We go on to point 3 of the agenda, will be the minutes of the last meeting. Before we go into there, just to let everybody know we're live. There is a normal list of things I need to say, but we are, due to the current situation, we're taking place virtually with members of the committee. So we will be reporting. It is live. Please use the on and off mute buttons when you want to speak. You know the way I work. I'm pretty chilled. Let's have some good discussions. We do normally use first names here, Jill, so you don't mind me calling you Jill. It seems to bring us close together because it's a little bit more informal. And make sure your video's on where possible. If you do need to leave to go to the bathroom, I do suggest you turn your video off so we know you've gone and then you come back. I think that's only fair. We've done the chairman. So we now go on to point 3, will be the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of June. I propose the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of June 2020, seems ages ago, as taken, read, confirmed and signed. Is everybody in agreement?
Yeah.
Yes.
Read.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We now come to question time, and we're going to go, we've received a question from Dr. Peters. So hello, Jill. You're attending the meeting. It's quite, I'm sure, I don't know if you've done this before, but it works quite well. We get a lot of information passed on. We have, I'm taking it that the question has been circulated and read by all members. So I'd like to, can I confirm that with all the members that we've seen the questions? Thank you very much. Before we answer it, have you got any supplementary to add to it, Jill? Because we've got your, and then I'll bring in Anne Carruthers to respond. There is an annex and it has been responded to. Just you make further comments, you're more than welcome.
So the only supplementary questions are that we would like to raise whether or not the buses have CCTV and whether or not they're using that to monitor the standing up on the upper deck or the enforcement of the standing up on the upper deck and the numbers of children in seats and whether or not people are actually sitting as required and in a child per seat. The additional part to that was another parent has asked me to raise that on school trips whilst accompanied by teachers, children have to wear seatbelts and that isn't expected of them on transport to and from schools when they're not accompanied. And so we'd like some clarification as to the reason for the discrepancy in that area.
Okay, that's a fair point. Just quickly, I'll just, before I go over to Anne, I do know that there's some because of the COVID, Jill, that was, I think standing's not allowed now at the moment because of the distancing. So I think at the moment, so I guess your question will be when we get out of this COVID pandemic, it will be the future. What are going to be the rules? Is that correct?
It's actually been observed in the week that, well, less than a week that the children have been back, that there is still standing on the upper deck of a double decker bus.
Observations of that. Okay.
Yes.
Let's go over to, thank you. Let's go over to Anne. Are you there, Anne?
I am, Chair. Good afternoon. But I'd like to just hand over to Pat Clark, the Assistant Director on this one, if all right. I'll hand over to him to pick up those points.
Hello, Pat.
Hello, Chair. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Anne. Just to pick up on a couple of the questions that's been asked. The vast majority of home to school transport, school buses, do not have CCTV on board. However, some commercially operated services do, as part of other issues they do. It's not a requirement of LCC, and also not a legal requirement to have CCTV on board. With regard to the specific question around children standing on the upper deck, no one should be standing on an upper deck of a bus. And if that is observed, it should be pointed out, one, to the driver, but equally, predominantly with regard to the school transport, back to the parents and back to the school. We must encourage that our children are safe when they are travelling, and it's everybody's responsibility to ensure that that happens. So it is partly the responsibility of it's the responsibility of the driver to ensure that the welfare of the pupils and other road users, but predominantly the behaviour on the bus is of the parents and the school that we need to pick that up with. With regard to the question around seat belts, the wearing of seat belts is dependent on the type of vehicle. It is mandatory for all children to wear seat belts on minibuses and coaches, as these types of vehicle have them fitted. But with regards to service vehicles like buses and double-deckers, it is not a mandatory requirement to have seat belts fitted. Therefore, not a mandatory requirement for children to wear them. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. I will go back to Jill. Are you there, Jill?
I'm here.
Yeah. Do you want to make a quick comment?
I think it's really difficult as a parent, because we all know that we can talk to our children and advise them, but the bottom line is we're not supervising them when they're on the buses. We don't have the opportunity to do that. The buses would be completely overcrowded were parents to attempt to accompany them, and clearly that's not a realistic expectation. And similarly, the schools can advise and can ask that children behave, but as a parent of a child who comes back and regularly reports behaviour on buses that I find concerning, and I know I'm not alone in that respect, it's really difficult for us to then know how that can be better managed when it's not our children that are causing those issues. They're experiencing or receiving that behaviour. Okay.
There's a few issues there, just and please chip in any of the members just quickly. I do understand your concern. I think, first of all, when you said, I'm interested in this, if it's been reported, a parent reported, did they, the first cab off the rank would have been, did they speak to the driver? Was it pointed out?
So I don't know any parents who have any contact with the driver of the bus, because the vast majority of our children take themselves into the village to get on the bus.
Yeah.
I know that this was observed because the parent was in a side road near to where the bus was driving past, and observed the bus in motion with a child stood on the top. Or I don't know how many children, I didn't ask, but with children stood on the top deck whilst the vehicle was in motion. I mean, the reality of that situation is that it wouldn't be possible for the parent to stop the vehicle or to speak to the driver.
Okay, that's fair enough. I think it's a communication, I guess. I'll talk that in a minute. The other point for me is, of course, on normal public transport, well, I've got grandkids and all that, we don't have safety belts. So on Aviva, the big double deckers. So I guess what Pat's already said there, there's not necessarily a requirement. I do know that the smaller buses, definitely, the 10-seaters, the 12-seaters, the 15-seaters, whatever, I do know there is a requirement seat belts. So I guess it's the major question is, should all public transport have, I think we've lost pictures there. Hello? Oh, we've come back. Did you lose that, everybody?
No.
Okay, anyway, so that was me. Must be the Malton network doing its best. So I guess there's issues there. Can one of the problems we've got, to be truthful, Jill, is we discussed it at length, and I've had issues, is we're trying, and we've had an issue this morning, we'll talk about it later today, is we are trying to improve our communication with schools. That's been a little bit difficult because, there are academies now, and there are different organised. 10 years ago, we had good communication. and we had a bit more authority. Since academisation, that's changed. So I guess from our point of view, we'll look at this and see if we can improve communication, and I'm sure see how we can go forward. Would anybody else like to make a comment?
Yes, please, Chair.
James.
I was just going to ask the question. I take it that there's obviously you know from the size of the bus how many seats, what the capacity of the bus is at all times, but especially in these COVID times. Is it monitored that everyone can have a seat? So I've been on buses pre-COVID. The capacity, I'm making it up for figures 50, and there's maybe 70 people on the bus. You know what I mean? So they have to stand because there isn't any seats. I take it we're now saying that there are X number of seats, so we allow X number of people on the bus, so that there at least could be a seat for everybody. Is that the case?
Jill, who's that a point to? James, who you're asking?
To whoever can
anybody answer that? Pat, is that to you?
Yeah, I'll pick that up, Chair, if that's okay. So with regards to these buses, they are specific school buses. They are not the general transport buses that I think we're alluding to here. And with those specific buses, we commission some of the services that's on there. And with the for children that are entitled or fall into a criteria of entitled to free school transport, and part of our contract negotiations with Beaver Bus and other bus operators is making sure there is a seat for everybody on board.
Okay, thank you. Over to Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to first of all thank Jill. I think your letter to us was absolutely first class, and it was very intense in reading it because there were so many points that you made. But congratulations, that was first class. But I equally feel confident looking at Appendix A that we are aware of this. We're not driving blind, as to speak. We have fantastic determination within our own systems and our own policy to try to make, in every possible way, children safe on those buses. But I understand, as a parent and a grandparent, we've all been there, and the anxiety of parents is really important, and we respect that and acknowledge that. But I think listening to this, that I hope that you can take some comfort that we are very interested, we are very concerned, we have a good policy that I think mirrors most of your complaints. In fact, looking at it and reading, I thought, we're virtually there, whether in virtually everything. It's impossible to make everybody happy, but in safety, I think it's paramount, and particularly with children, absolutely. And I think really what we're doing is our very best as a body. And I think that if the parents do spot things and try to evaluate it, whether it's 5 standing or was it 1 or whatever, the more information, and we need to observe this, it needs to be pushed along the line so we can deal with it and help. I understand the difficulty, a bus is moving, you can't talk to a driver and you lose the detail and everything else. But we are mindful, and I think as a member of this board, I'm as anxious as you are, and I know that my colleagues are all the same, that we want this to be safe and very successful through this most difficult time. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dan. Bill, how are you?
Hi, thank you. Yes, thank you, Jill, for bringing this to our attention. Would it be possible to write to the bus companies to remind them that people are not allowed to stand in the upper deck? Just a gentle reminder. The onus should be on the bus company to make sure they're obeying the legal requirements. I think just a letter would be useful. Okay,
Pat, could you just check that for us? And I guess the other question is as well, what is there any notices for the children to read, and is there a potential to inform on a regular basis and work with the schools? I think we need to talk to that later away from this, but we'll see what we can do, Pat. Yeah.
Yes, no problem at all, Chair. Thank you.
Okay,
Chair.
are you happy with that? Any comments there? Sorry, Anne, over to you.
Chair, can I just add one other thing? As with any behavioural issue, if they're standing when there shouldn't be, and as Pat's quite clearly said, there is responsibility in the individual child, the information to the parent, the bus company, the school, so everybody knows in theory what they should be doing. And we all appreciate how difficult it is to police these things and make sure it's complied to all the time, which is part of the challenge here. But actually, even before this, the particular standing issue, if we had behavioural problems on school transport, where that gets reported to us and we investigate, there's obviously a level of severity at which, if it is an eligible child on school transport that we are commissioning, we can take action. Ultimately, it can mean exclusion of a child if they refuse to, comply, and it is endangering others or endangering themselves, etc. Obviously, we wouldn't want to get there, but there are means we can take when it is about an eligible child. Now, some transport, it's complex, as I'm sure Jill appreciates, but some transport isn't fully commissioned by ourselves as the county council and have all the children on board are therefore, eligible children. We have some, such as the Beaver bus case, where it's a mixture of, fare paying children and eligible children, which complicates it. But equally, if it's eligible children, we are able to do something about it in a service we commission. We can, if there are behavioural issues that endanger safety. As I say, those instances, thank goodness, are few and far between, and we'd always want to, work with the bus operator and the school and reinforce messages to parents before anything like that happened. But in the interest of, everybody's safety, sometimes we have to go down that line. So that's about the behavioural thing. But again, the concern here about standing when we shouldn't, when it's, clear with the bus operator, would make clear with parents and the school. If there's continually an issue, we would have to see if there was something else we had, and it was raised with us and we found that to be accurate, that reporting. There are potentially other things we could look at. Thank you, Anne.
Okay, thank you, Jill. We'll further look at this. I really appreciate your letter, and you don't have to stay around for the rest of the meeting. Maybe it doesn't tick some of the boxes that you're interested in, but really appreciate you making time, and we do really appreciate you getting in contact.
Thank you very much.
And you take care. Thank you, Jill.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, we go now on to the next agenda item, which will be questions, standing orders, and we've received none from members. Item 6 on the agenda, items that the chairman decided to take urgent elsewhere. We have no urgent items. Declaration of interests. At the time of the agenda, we didn't have any. Have we any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Then a declaration of party whip with overview and scrutiny procedure rule 16. No members of declarations. Presentations of petitions. We have no presentations of petitions at this point in time. Obviously, we will speak to officers and when these occur, so everyone can have their say. So that we go straight now on to item 10, and this is the first agenda. It's the Environment and Transport Performance Report, and this is for the date of the 2021. It's on pages 1124 of the agenda pack. We're going to zap over to Anne, Director of the Environment and Transport, who will present this. We've got, I think, Nicola, is Nicola there as well?
Yes, hello, Chair.
Hello, Nicola, welcome.
Thank you.
She's the business partner in the intelligence service, and we just, questions, I'll take them afterwards. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Chair. This performance report reports up to the period June 2020. Members will have noticed that it's slightly different to previous reports as we've updated the indicators to reflect the revised environment strategy and the Council's strategic plan. We now have 47 indicators, so quite a number, set out in Appendix A. Although not all of these are within our control, for instance, the air quality ones, biodiversity, there's a number there that don't all fall within LCC's control, direct control. We have felt that it's worth including those to give a wider picture of particularly around environmental performance across the county. We've been asked to differentiate between the indicators that we do have direct control of and those we don't. And what we propose to do is we will look to highlight and separate them out by distinguishing the ones that are entirely internal to the County Council and those that are external, noting that in those cases, that group of external indicators, the LCC has varying control or influence in, the performance on that category, and we'll seek to present it in that way for the next performance report. So that's very much a work in progress. Corporately, we're also working up dashboards for climate change and environment. Obviously, members are fully aware we have our climate commitment, and that will be done as a standalone so that we can specifically monitor performance in this area, and also as an aid to decision making about best actions, priorities, etc. And again, very much a work in progress, and we'll keep the committee updated on that. We have 9 indicators for the department that reflect the strategic plan, and they are still under development, and those are set out in Appendix B of the report. Moving on then to the actual performance update this time. Of the 47 indicators, 43 have been updated. The other ones that are not updated is usually due to the, we don't have the data updates. They are updated less frequently. And performance has improved for 17 of them. It's declined for 7 and stayed the same for 19 indicators, so quite a mix there. What I want to do, if members are looking at their papers, particularly point you to Appendix A, and the points that pick out on that dashboard for you are as follows. Condition of highways, very much as we've reported the trend in the past, we're meeting our targets for A-class road, B-class and C-class roads, and we are in the top quartile, but we are seeing a deteriorating situation in this, and again, members are well aware of that. We have discussed this for a number of times. Unclassified roads, however, we're not meeting our target now. We're falling below that in terms of the percentage that needs action and intervention. Local bus journeys, we have declined in that, over the last few years. We've had a bit of a, gone back up from around about 12 million to around about 13 million. We were at 13.4 million in March 2019, and we're down to 12.7 million March 2020, 5% decline there. COVID may have had an impact at the very tail end of that March, but that is looks for the that's the kind of annual performance there. So again, our performance, we're in the 3rd quartile there, but that hasn't moved. But as I say, we've seen a decline on the latest data. Similarly, park and ride journeys have declined between Q3 and Q4 of last year. Bit of COVID impact, but I don't think that's going to be exploding at all. I think there's more a general trend at play there, but we'll very much monitor over time, although over the next few quarters, because of our current scenario and reduced usage, we're not going to see any changes. If anything, it's going to go the other way. It's going to keep declining. Moving on to the strong economy indicators, at the bottom of the first page, you'll see that there are some new environmental indicators. Now, we're only beginning to collate that data, so we will build that up over time. And, some are still in development, so we'll keep appraising you of those, but it's good to start somewhere, and we'll start that journey with you. Under well-being, at the top of the second page, we have 2 air quality indicators. Now, I know the committee is aware, because we talk about air quality from time to time, that that responsibility sits with district councils, but we feel it's important to observe those trends across the county and understand better how we can contribute. And again, a number of the committee are probably very familiar. There's been a recent member briefing on air quality, and also I think quite an extensive discussion at Scrutiny Commission. And the work coming out of that, the Director of Public Health, who leads on air quality from our perspective, he's reviewing the action plan that is to go to Cabinet. Now, Environment and Transport will very much support him in that work where we have a role to do that. So very much an evolving picture. And again, we'll keep you updated over time on that. Keeping people safe about our road safety indicators. The committee, you're well aware from our detailed road safety reports that we bring to you that we do perform well against other local authorities. But I just want to point out that the improvements we're seeing there for walking, cycling and motorcycling statistics in particular, I think we do need to take these with a note of caution because of the changing recording methods that we've seen. And also we've seen the start of the COVID restrictions, and very much reduced traffic on the roads may also come into play there. Moving on to the Great Communities outcomes and the renewable energy indicators. We don't have direct control over these, but we do support a range of initiatives that contribute towards them, such as financial support for biomass boilers, for community groups, that kind of grant scheme, etc. We have good performance for renewable energy capacity in the area. That's improved by 4% since the previous year. Renewable energy generated in the area has actually improved by 9% over the last year, and renewable heat incentive deployment per 10,000 households has improved by 10%. So all really moving in the right direction and some real good traction on there. The waste-related indicators haven't changed substantially since the last time we've discussed, so I won't go over those. Affordable and quality homes outcomes, the energy efficiency of homes, it considers the energy efficiency of homes. Percentage of domestic properties with energy performance certificate rating C+, that's declined in performance from just over 53% to 49% in Q4. Mr. Payne had asked, with his remit, his portfolio of environment, he'd asked us for a breakdown of those, and I thought it might be worthwhile giving that to the committee as well. So for the Q4 figures, just comparing how we're doing in Leicestershire to the national picture. For existing dwellings, those that meets that energy rating performance, for Leicestershire is 34%. The England figure is 40%. So, 34% is against your 40. So for existing dwellings, we are behind the national level. For new dwellings, however, it's a different picture. For Leicestershire, we're at 99%, whereas the English figure is 94%. So again, we're outperforming on the new builds, which is really good news. And that means that across all dwellings, when we take them together, Leicestershire is at 49% and the English figure is at 47%. So we're doing slightly better than the English picture. So it's quite interesting there to differentiate between the existing dwellings and the new builds coming onto the market. Right, just a final couple of points. Corporate enablers into investments in initiatives such as renewables, street lighting, all that investment is continuing to pay off because we've seen an 18% fall in emissions for LCC's greenhouse gas emissions. So really, really good there. And similar improvements for the total CO2 emissions from our own sites. There's been a 20% reduction. Some other indicators, we're likely to see improved performance in the next quarter due to COVID, for good and bad of that, such things as business miles. As you can imagine, we've moved to a substantially different way of working under this COVID scenario, and that is completely changed. Then things like business mileage, waste from our own sites, etc., will be massively reduced. So I expect we'll see, over the coming few quarters, we'll see some quite different performance in a number of areas, both good and bad. So it will be interesting to monitor that. Thanks very much, Chair. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Anne. Have we any questions? David?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think this is a very commendable report, considering the circumstances in which we all find ourselves. Anne made mention of the air quality issue, which is on page 14, and the series of meetings that have taken place this week. I think there is now an appreciation across the whole of the County Council that this is an issue which we have to tackle. And I think we're all looking forward to Mike Sand's further report, which is going to come back to us. I noticed the DEFRA have offered a £2 million fund
for air quality initiatives. We didn't raise this morning, but it has occurred to me since this morning. Are we aware of this fund, and can this be fed into our deliberations to see whether we can actually use any of this to improve the air across the county?
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Now, I'm not sure that's Anne or Nicola. Who would?
I think that's Anne.
I'll take that, Chair, if that's all right. Yes, we are aware of the fund. It just come out in the last couple of days, literally. We'll need to wait. We'll need to wait and see what the detailed criteria are on it. It did say it was directed at local authorities, but all the examples it gave was about community groups and community initiatives. However, yes, absolutely, we need to maximise any opportunities like that. The only thing I would say, £2 million nationally really does not go a long way. So I just want to manage, even I took a sharp intake of breath at that. Really, it's not a lot of money, seriously. And I know there was a big fanfare about it, but it would have been nice to see a few notes on that. But, hey, we will certainly try and take every opportunity we can.
Thanks, Anne. And thanks, Dave. That was great. Just David alluded to this morning and the briefing with Mike Sands. I think for other members that weren't there this morning, that there is an additional now action plan because, of course, although it's transport and environment, we've got public health involved as well. So, when we do get the further report, because things are quite flexible and transient at the moment, things are moving around. So we will see that as a committee. We will see that report in the near future from my Sands. So I'll make sure it comes through this committee. I've got Mr. Bolter. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Yes. Good afternoon, Anne.
Well, good to see you, mate.
Unclassified roads below target. What we're going to do about that? And I noticed on the next report we've not doing any surface dressing this year, so that's going to make things even worse. But how are we going to address this problem about unclassified roads not meeting the target?
Okay, no, absolutely, a real challenge for us. Now, you'll be very aware, because we've brought several times to this committee, our asset management approach and basically how we have to manage, in line with government code of practice, how we have to manage maintaining our highways. And that's fundamentally about assessing the risk. So the highest safety issues first, etc., and preventative rather than reactive. The more money you can get in preventative, the more you extend and expand the lifespan of your asset, i.e. a bit of carriageway. So we want to get to the stage you've got less immediate defects and actually you put more money into the preventative. Overall, it is an ongoing challenge. Us and the rest of the country are trying to deal with this. Funding just isn't sufficient, and that message has been going to government consistently. But fundamentally, what we are doing is we are looking at our asset management and dealing with it by putting the most we can into the planned preventative stuff to elongate the life cycle as we can. But the reality will be that we just don't have sufficient funding to change that trend. At most, we're going to slow down the rate of deterioration, but it will be a rate of deterioration. And again, that's a situation across the country that every local highway authority is faced with, and makes that point time and time again to government. But as you'll see from those indicators, while we're not meeting target, we're still performing very well in comparison to our comparator authorities. So, and often I get anecdotally from members and colleagues as well about how Leicestershire roads, are much better than, when you go and drive in some other area, etc. But actually the facts show, based on the condition information we have to submit to the Department of Transport every year, that actually we are high performing and our road condition is quite good. But that doesn't mean we're not in a deteriorating situation.
Okay, Alan, in that case, perhaps Trevor might like to put that comment back to Cabinet that, we're falling below the standard. Can they put some pressure on government to get us some more funding for maintaining roads?
Well, before Trevor comes in, you're right. But I will say, and I know Blake will be aware, all the members of this committee, Bill, this has been an issue for a number of years now in this committee, that we've got such a network of roads, the cost, we are performing better, but you're quite right, it is deteriorating. And one of the issues for all of us, we live in a rural area, and it is something we've got to keep an eye on. But I'm sure Trevor will comment, take this to the cabinet and do something. I'm not sure how we move that forward, Trevor.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it's a given, of course, in that we're monitoring it all the time. I have to say that our teams have done extremely well, and we are at the highest levels that really, you know, we can be expected to be on the funding levels that we've got. We'll go through the LGA, we'll go through CCN and the like, and we should lobby there, and we should look for cross-party lobbying, of course, as well, which is important. And I will take that and mention that, of course, in cabinet, but it is being monitored all the time. Thank you, Chairman.
So what we'll do is, Bill, I think from this constantly comes up to this scrutiny committee, and I think we keep on looking, we keep on asking the question. I'm sure you will, and I'm sure David will, and Max and myself. So all of us involved, it means a lot to us because we all live in the rural area. So, but I do know we're doing a best job as possible for the resources we've got. And I, again, will say this again, I drive, I haven't been driving recently, but when I do drive around the country, it is notable for me, in most cases, how better our roads are. So, OK, we'll go to Janice. Thank you.
Sorry, are you to me, Chairman?
Yes, Janice.
Oh, thank you.
Over to you.
The item I wanted to really comment was further down the agenda, but because Anna's touched on air quality, I think the two things overlap. So if you think I should bring it further down the agenda when I start, Chairman,
I think if it's what we've discussed regarding the cycleways, bring it down later.
Yeah, but it's really about the air quality that goes with it. So I don't know whether you want me to bring it further down or not on the agenda.
Bring it down further on. I think it's more meets later on the agenda.
OK, thanks, Chairman.
Thanks for asking, Jack. Can we go to, I'm looking, there's one other. Max, thank you.
Yeah, it's me. Thanks very much, Alan. I'd like to just echo the comments we've made about the new format of the report, which is excellent, but also no doubt loads of work has gone into it because it shows the addition of the environmental measurements are really important. And so that's really another gain. So thanks for that. My only comment on the detail, because I think we know roughly where the problems have been, there's still in waste disposal and so on, and collection and landfill and so on. I know these are being tackled in other ways, but there's one measurement which I think Ian Veers has described as measuring vulnerable road users and the casualties that occur for vulnerable road users. Unfortunately, these divide into completely different classes of road user, namely motorbikes, and we're very keen to measure location and numbers of motorbike accidents because they can be really severe, and often one might say that they're more to do with the rider than perhaps cycle and walking So what we're trying to do there, presumably, is to measure the different types of casualty and what we can do about it. But if you mix the two types of casualty together, motorcycles, walkers, cyclists, you're mixing, if you like, apples with pears with bananas and trying to work out what the best solutions are to the rising number of that cluster. That doesn't seem to me helpful. It seems to me much better to divide certainly motorcycles from what we now call active travel, so that we can operate on them more effectively. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Max. We discussed this morning at the briefing.
We did.
Is Ian there? I think you had a comment here.
So I am here. Yes, vulnerable road users, which refers to those people not in cars surrounded by a ton of metal, who are much more vulnerable, is a way that they're treated nationally. As members will know, in our yearly report, we go very detailed on the extent of what we find out about car users, people in buses, and into walking, cycling, mopeds, scooters, and different types of vehicles. So we do split them. our detailed work will really still be at that level. We've just included this here as a higher level indicator, but if it turns out that we wish to split that further, we can look at that. But say vulnerable road users is something that's used nationally, so that's why we picked that term. But please be assured our work will concentrate at the individual level.
Thank you. That's great.
Okay, Bill, have you put your hand up again? Bill Bolter, did you? Sorry, microphone, Bill.
Never mind. Right, okay, right.
Gotcha.
Yes, if you could please. Yes, it's a different subject. Item 26, the amount of waste is below the national average that we're doing. So how are we doing with the tips now? I mean, are we going to start taking hard plastics again and recycling that, or have we got an outlet for hard plastics, or what's happening to the stuff now? Because recent newspaper article suggests that a lot of the stuff is not being recycled now, it's going straight into landfill, which concerns me.
Okay.
I thought we were recycling about everything at the sites, but apparently not now.
Okay, I think Joe, I think Joe's the one for that. Yeah, Joe?
I can't get my mic off mute quick enough, Chair. Apologies. Right. It's a theme. Afternoon, everybody. To be honest, the short answer is we continue to pursue recycling whatever we can, wherever we can, within financial constraints. You know, so if it were, for example, this is not the case, but if it were £500 a tonne to trial an experimental recycling of some plastic toys, we simply can't accommodate that when landfill is £120 a tonne. But we do still recycle some sort of pots and trays type hard plastics. Bric-a-brac and toys is slightly different, and we monitor the market, so we always try and have some of that material available should we have a load that we can send to the market to test if it's viable material, because sometimes they have electronics in them, they've got metals mixed with the plastics just in the way they're constructed. So they're a really difficult material, and when the markets are constrained, they pull back from those materials. The only positive I'll say is obviously coming in the future is the extended producer responsibility. It was mentioned on that Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall programme the other night. The producer responsibility will put the onus on the producers of products, whether they're sandwich containers with a plastic liner suction cupped to the cardboard or whether it's a plastic toy. It will put the onus on them to start and think about the products that they make, because they'll be responsible for some of the costs at the end of life. So it's going to be an interesting time for us, because at the minute we just pick up the tab as the local authority in financial terms. So it's a mixed picture. We're always trying to make sure where there's a market, we have a pipeline of material to send. And obviously what we've been concentrating on in the last couple of months is getting those sites all reopened. And what we're still looking to do is get the full range of material at all 14 sites. So that is still not quite fully concluded, but we're working on that at the minute.
Okay. Is that all right with you, Bill?
It's a good start. I like challenging Joanne, as you well know.
I know that, Bill, after all these years. I do know.
Are we going to stick to the permit, well, the appointment system at the tips or not?
The booking system.
Every fortnight.
The booking system. Sorry, I missed the last bit that you said, Phil. But the booking system at the minute, what I tell my officers is we should be assuming, and colleagues in the CSC and customer services, I anticipate us still having this booking system for the remainder of this financial year, and it might be for next financial year. That doesn't mean that we won't look at the booking system and whether we can improve it or enhance it, because we had to put it in under really difficult times, a really speedy introduction. So it has had its hiccups along the way. It's fundamentally about keeping the public and the staff on the sites safe. And I think we've mentioned in previous updates, and Anne might come on to it when she talks about the COVID report, that the bottom line is we have real sensitivities with sites that are co-located next to our transfer stations and district depots, and 80%, a huge proportion of the waste goes through that infrastructure. If we got in the way by removing the booking system and having extensive queues like we are still seeing in other parts of the country, we would undermine our ability to move the waste to its disposal point. So it really serves a beneficial purpose in regulating the flow of people through the site, but we will constantly look to improve improve the booking system as we go forward on the assumption that nothing changes around the pandemic. So it's there for the medium term at the minute.
And will that still remain every fortnight, or can it go weekly?
I think you can have more than one visit every fortnight. You can certainly have two, and I'll have to check. I'll come back to you if I may, if it's been improved further on that. But you can make more than one booking in a fortnight. It's improved on that already.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Bill. James Poland. James, are you there?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just really on the booking system, I haven't had too many comments from residents. It seems to be going well, and actually I've had some positive ones, but I've had also people raise sort of issues that we can look at as part of the process. So it'd be good if sort of members can feed in to that process as well. Really, you sort of touched on the question I was going to ask at the end there really in Joe, in that we are limiting the number of appointments people can make. Is that essentially to stop businesses using it sort of every day, twice a day? What would happen if we suddenly said, actually, we're not having it on the number of households that can use it? Because the concerns I've had from residents are along the lines of, I've got a big garden but a small car, will I be able to get it all in one go? Those sorts of things. You might have a number of different cars that can have different journeys. It's a bit confusing, and if we were to just say, actually, as long as you can prove who you are and that you're not doing it commercially, could we just have no limit on the number of visits and someone can make to a tip?
Chair, if you may, can I come back on that? Unfortunately, Jo had a prior appointment she just could not avoid, so sends her apologies. She has had to go. But just on that, James, as Jo kind of said earlier, we have extended it. It did start at one booking per fortnight. We've changed that to 2 bookings per fortnight, and we are looking at it further. And it may be the case that at some sites we're able to offer more, because it depends how busy they are and how quickly people actually are moving through those. Because we did find in the very early days, some sites, there was a couple, Mount Sorrel was one of them, actually it was taking people a lot longer, the same number of people a lot longer to get through. Now, whether that's all just they were slower, they all brought far more amounts of waste, I don't know, but we're learning all the time as we go on that. So ultimately, at the moment, for the reason Jo has said, we can't go to a non-booking system at all. The social distancing requirements, the potential issues of the traffic management and its impact on operations close to the RHWS, we can't do that at all. However, we are looking to make it as flexible as possible for people when we're convinced and we know we've got the capacity to deal with them. Some sites are much quieter than others, so we can, hopefully look to try and extend that. But at the moment, we have managed to increase it 2 in a fortnight, and we'll continue to look to see if we can ease that to make it easier for people. But we do need to have that kind of pre-book thing so we know we've got it under control.
Thank you, Anne. And Blake?
Yes, Alan, thank you. I just want to say that I have to go to another meeting at 3. I've got a UK 100, what they call a countryside climate network meeting, where we're going to be discussing a lot of environmental issues. So I just want to say that I've noted the comments, and they're welcome, about the new reporting measures for the Environment Department. Clearly, it's already been explained that some of those measures are beyond the direct control of the local authority. But of course, unless we can measure these things, we can't monitor. And it's the intention to become net zero carbon by 2030 as an authority. And to help us along that journey, we really do need to be able to measure and monitor progress. So I'm pleased that those indicators have been welcomed. And once we've streamlined and filtered those indicators through and worked out how best to report on them, I look forward to keeping the panel up to date on those indicators. So with that, Chairman,
it's always a pleasure to have the Deputy Leader present, and you're always welcome.
Thanks a lot, Alan. Have a good meeting.
Over to you, Trevor.
Bye.
Thank you, Chairman. I will just say to David, and to James, in terms of looking after the workforce, that was one of the main reasons that we brought in the booking system. And I will not put our workforce at any risk whatsoever. And I think it's just on that basis the booking system will stay, as Joe and Anne have indicated, for some considerable time, constantly reviewing it. And as you've heard, we've gone up to 2 possible meetings per household in a fortnight. And I think that's pretty good going. Even I can't generate that amount. So, you know, I'm pretty satisfied, Chairman.
Okay.
From that point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Anne, yes, over to you, Anne. Then I want to go to Janice. Anne?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I wasn't aware there was any other hands up. I just wanted to come back in. I was aware I didn't answer Mr. Bolter's surface dressing point. We didn't do surface dressing this year. He's quite right. We couldn't undertake it and had social distancing with the workforce. It was just too challenging to do, so we opted not to do that. That funding went into other treatments on the network. And the other thing I would say, again, just, you know, following up on our conversation about the condition of the network and the amount of investment, we have said that the government amalgamated a number of funds a couple of months ago and allocated them out. Some of them had been competitive funds and allocated them out. So we've received just over 14 million additional for highways. Now, some of that is ring fenced to specific schemes because we'd had to bid for, but some of it isn't. And we will be bringing a report in November about where we intend to put that additional spend.
Thank you, Anne. I appreciate that. I just want to bring Janice in at the end now, because I had a call, spoke to this morning, an interesting observation regarding air quality and cycleways. Janice, do you want to just your observation?
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I couldn't unmute my mic.
That's okay.
Yeah, it really appeared further down in the agenda, but it states on the agenda that County Council was allocated 335,000 to put in place temporary measures to encourage walking, cycling along transport corridors. And these will be closely monitored and, if successful, could be permanent. I do have concerns about this project. Because surely this will cause even greater congestion on our already overcrowded network. And the cycle lanes on the A47 into Leicester knock out a bus lane. So can I ask, does this happen in any other roads in Leicestershire that knock out the bus lane? Surely this will create more exposure to further toxic fumes, which I know we're all concerned about. So something we're trying to overcome to aim for better air quality. I do have concerns about this project, and I would like to hear what other members probably feel about this. Thank you, Chairman.
So Anne, can we? I brought it because part of this agenda is the air quality. You saw on from this first. I guess the issue is I think they call them zippers in America, where 2 lanes go into one, and then now we've got cycle pathways which are important. But if it causes congestion, then instead of preventing air quality through cycling, we're actually potentially causing more air quality because of the traffic jams. We need to move on from the agenda, but can we sort of make a point of this and discuss this in the future? Because it's quite interesting to get feedback how and the impact of some of these ideas of road maintenance and the potential impact on how we change the network to cater for all types of transport.
I do feel, Chairman, if I may come back, please, because it could expose further toxic fumes. It's something that we need to get to grips with as a main issue about the environment. And if it's narrowing some of the roads and making the traffic even more congested, it does deeply concern me. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, and I think it concerns us all, Janice, and I think it's a good point. I guess it's something we can monitor and
just if I really quickly, and then Ian might want to come in depending on obviously time. Just that work was done under government's funding. It was DFT, Department for Transport Funding, Emergency Active Travel Fund. They put it out specifically in response to the government message that people should not be using public transport. So and because during lockdown we saw traffic levels go right down, but people out walking and cycling, and they were keen to continue with that, but at the same time try and provide alternatives for local trips where there was heavily used public transport corridors, because the government message was very much, please don't use public transport at that time. Therefore, all local transport authorities were asked to bid for this funding, and we were given a provisional allocation. Our provisional allocation was 300,000. We bid and we actually got 335,000, as the report says. And we have looked at those busy public transport corridors to see what we could do to help support walking and cycling. The other one is the A6 corridor in Bristol. I think I probably forgot one and left it out, but I think that's it. Ian's got more detail on that. But that was the actual context of why we've gone for that. But just to augment that, while the government message on public transport has changed since that time, there has been a second round of that funding, and our provisional allocation was 1.2 million, and we're hoping to hear next week whether we're successful in that for more permanent measures, but of the same ilk, more walking and cycling support. And just to be absolutely clear, government has come out in the last month or so with a revised, it's called Changing Gears, cycling walking strategy for active transport. And they're absolutely clear, government's transport policy is changing significantly. Far more emphasis on walking and cycling, and we as highway authorities have to be showing how we are supporting that, or they're saying to us you're not going to receive funding in future. So that's just the context. Happier to obviously have more detailed conversations, but that's a context of why we've done what we've done and why we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you. And Ian, do you want to add anything?
No, that's why the director is the director, when she answers so well. The only thing I was going to say was we had anticipated that members of E&T Scrutiny would want a paper bringing on the government's real quite drastic change in walking and cycling and its emphasis. So we are just working one up to see when we can bring it back, because they've given some very strong messages.
Well, I'm sure we'll look forward to that. And I know Max can't wait. Is that right, Max?
Well, I just wondering whether Janice might contact Boris. He's the bike man, isn't he? He's probably all his thoughts.
Listen,
Chairman, may I just come back in just quickly? Thank you, Max, for that. I just feel that it has to be debated a lot more, because I've heard today on the news that in Leicester that parents are not going on the buses, they're using their own transport, cars and that. So to me, the car is still going to be a prominent feature, and it concerns me that, obviously I support the same as Boris, support cycling and walking, but our road system was built for another era. And so it concerns me how we're going to overcome this. But thank you very much, Chairman.
You make a very good point, and I think we're all. But let's get the report, and then it will come to this committee, which is great. I think we'll be the first to see it. So we'll be all looking forward to it. Thank you very much,
Chairman. Thank you.
We'll move on now. I think we've done that. A good discussions. Let's go on now to the next agenda item, which is 11, which is the COVID-19 recovery update. That's page 25 and 44 on the agenda pack. Anne, over to you again, I think.
Thanks very much, and I hope you'll indulge me a few minutes, because I will take a few minutes if that's all right, because there has been an awful lot happening, but I thought Scrutiny Committee would be quite keen to hear about that detail, so please forgive me and indulge me for a few minutes on this. Under our COVID recovery work, we very much align that to the wider Council COVID recovery strategy for 2021. And this report is updating since we brought the initial report in June to you about, very early days. This is where we're at, and this is, how we've dealt with it. So, but the interim work we're doing under that recovery strategy is going to evolve into our business planning, because I'm sure the committee is fully aware we're not at some point just going to go back to the way things were February or before February. This has caused us to evolve our working models and what we do and how we do it quite substantially, and that will change in future. So it will feed into our business planning for next year and future years, etc. Right, I'm going to start with a kind of highways side. In the context, we've just heard in our previous debate there, traffic levels early on in COVID were impacted considerably. The graph you see under paragraph 8 shows that initially traffic levels fell to 20% of what would be normal traffic levels. I'm sure you all experienced that, much quieter roads out there, etc. What we've seen, because we've monitored it daily, we've had reports daily on where the traffic is, we're round about back up to 80% of normal levels. So people have largely gone back to maybe the way they were, despite an awful lot of us still being home based when we weren't before, etc. Traffic levels have come back up. There has been positive and negative factors. Cycling and walking, people have been out more doing that kind of thing. Again, we just talked about that. But also, and I guess, and I'm sure probably even locally, you will be aware of or seen on the media that there's been, you know, a fair bit of speeding, really excessive speed, and you probably non-compliance with, you know, basic rules of the road out there actually during that lockdown period when traffic was much quieter. So quite interesting trends coming out there. So that's kind of context of the highway network during the COVID. In terms of our highway services, initially we stood down a lot of services, some of our operations, and you heard about that in detail in our June report. But over the last few months, they've all been stood up. Everything is operating again. However, I would caveat that though, because of social distancing and how we are able to operate, we might be delivering it in a different way. And actually, unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, that means it's more expensive for us, because either we need more people or more vehicles, because people can't be in a vehicle together, etc., etc. So we've had to absorb that and develop new operating practices in a number of areas. As Mr. Bolter's pointed out, we couldn't do our surface dressing programme this year because it wasn't feasible and comply with social distancing and keep it safe for our workforce. But we did divert our staff onto different operations and reduce the need for agency staff that we have as a business. In terms of our major schemes, the ones that were on site, they continued, and the A46 Anstey Road scheme has now completed. The work at Junction 23 and the M1 is continuing. Again, the adapted process is on site successfully, and those schemes have been continuing. And we have reviewed our overall capital programme as part of the wider LCC review of our capital programme. So some projects will see some delay in coming to site because of COVID. The only other point worth noting on the highway side, it has been difficult getting HGV MOTs. You know, members will remember we own and operate our own fleet, over 400 vehicles, and a number of them are HGVs because of the type of services we deliver. And actually, there's been a real issue because there was a whole pause on them. But when they came back online, there wasn't the resources to deal with the requirements. And we're having to carefully manage that to make sure that critical vehicles aren't out of action, you know, that impact on our service, but we are doing that. But that was another impact we've had to deal with. In terms of public transport, you know, usage went down, you know, for across all the operators between 90 and 95%. So they've been severely hit through this. The figures somewhere around about, well, for Arriva, just local conversations recently, they're saying they're back up to around about 50% patronage. Obviously, with the schools going back, etc., and probably more people going back to work, we might see that come up again, but that's where we are in public transport. Scrutiny is aware that we have 33 subsidised services, and under a new public transport, a passenger transport policy and strategy, we were reviewing them and the value for money and how we took those forward. We were halfway through that work when COVID hit, and we've paused that because it isn't the market to assess bus usage, etc., and value for money. So that is on pause at the moment. We're also, though, however, paying those contracts at 100%. Despite the fact that, you know, for a while they either were significantly reduced or at the moment they're not quite up to their full operating. However, understand the vast majority are. Now, we did that because the government has asked us to do that, and also to support the bus market, because we all understand the implications if the viability of the local market suffers considerably and operators go out of business in terms of, you know, the transport options for our residents out there in Leicestershire. The viability, we are looking at carrying out our own work to understand the viability of the bus operator market given the current situation. And when we've got that work complete, we will consider how much we should continue paying that level of 100%. And that again will come into, we're in a similar position for concessionary fares. We reimburse concessionary fares to the operators. However, as you'll appreciate, there's been very little usage of concessionary fares. However, we have been reimbursing at pre-COVID levels, and we will consider that as well. COVID, in terms of public transport, we estimate is costing it just under £1 million. Now, that comes from delayed savings, i.e. you can't deliver on those savings we'd anticipated. Lost income from Park and Ride, because Park and Ride's been hit as well. And I'm sure you're aware that the Bristol site is being used as a testing station, so it's out of action. And also income from other schemes we had in relation to public transport. Government's provided grant funding to the bus companies, either through ourselves or directly to the operators, you know, in acknowledgement of how difficult it has been for that market. If I move on to the school bus services, again, before the end of term, we were paying those at 100%. And taxi operators, who we use predominantly for the SEN transport, they were paid a 25% retainer. Obviously, with things being up and running now for this new term, we've gone out to the market, so things, you know, payment there will be as per the services being provided. We did receive some funding, additional funding from government just very laterally. We got 541,000 for school transport. That was from the Department for Education, and that's to put on additional vehicles where we feel the capacity isn't sufficient, and particularly around where public transport services, it's not dedicated school services, but public transport services carry school children, and therefore, you know, to keep down the pressure on those routes, we've got the ability to bring on additional vehicles. So we're, you know, applying that, and we have just about allocated all of that funding. In terms of waste, we, as you know, we closed down all our sites because a journey to the tip wasn't considered an essential journey according to the government guidance. But from following pressure from government and the public, to be fair, those sites have gradually opened from the 18th of May. We have them all fully up and running, and as you know, there is a booking system in place, and we've discussed, you know, how long that might be in place for, or where we're at in the moment with that. On the environment side, things have been very busy. We had an all-member briefing on climate change, which I know some of you were at, and I hope you found useful. We've had a number of virtual meetings with external parties around the environmental agenda and carbon reduction. The carbon reduction tranche 2 work, which is the county-wide work, is not just LCC work, it's the emissions across the county. We're developing the roadwork and map for that, and it's very much based around partnership working, obviously, because a lot of this is within the remit of other organisations or sectors. That, we reckon, has been delayed by about at least 6 months because COVID has put a bit of a damper on, obviously, our partnership working, and people have had different priorities during this point in time. So we will pick that up again, but, you know, we do know that there will be delays in what we'd anticipated our timetable there. Similarly, we had planned to develop a joint municipal waste management strategy with the district authorities. It's a statutory document we're required to have from government in terms of waste collection and disposal. That has been delayed for similar reasons. Again, parties, you know, ourselves and the districts have been otherwise engaged, so to speak, but we will pick that up again. Other things to pick out for you. Under the Local Resilience Forum recovery work, we've supported the district councils in reopening their town centres. They got money from MHCLG to support the businesses in reopening the town centres. Where we were involved in that was social distancing measures, particularly affecting the highways. So if they wanted widened footways to help with social distancing outside their businesses and their town centres, etc. So we did an awful lot of work on that in very short timescales. And similarly, we have had money from government, as we've just discussed. Mrs. Richards has picked up there money for walking and cycling and active travel, and we are working under very tight timescales to bid for money and implement measures with that funding. So again, kind of real short timescale work. We've had to drop everything else and go for that, and we've been busy doing that and are continuing to do that, as I've mentioned. I thought it'd be interesting to put in about lessons learned, and paragraph 67 to 70 in the report picks out a few. I think one of the ones, I would pick out is, while we all had business continuity plans of how to deal with an emergency, they, to be fair, were very, very geared up to a kind of short-term, quick, short, sharp, and it's over and move on kind of instance, i.e. all your IT going down, severe weather, that type of thing. As we all know, the pandemic has gone on for months. We hadn't really been geared up to be doing that. So that's been a big learning lesson for us. And what we're doing is an exercise to review how we manage our business continuity, particularly coming into winter, when it's highly likely we'll have to deal with a number of incidents at the same time. We've got COVID ongoing, we might have severe weather, we've got, EU exit and, any ramifications of that around that day, or any other instance that might come up. So that's been a key learning point for us, and we are trying to put things in place to make us a bit more resilient around that. Finally, resources, and then I'll stop. At the moment, we estimate that COVID has cost environment and transport an extra just under £6.5 million. Main areas have been lost savings. We've not been able to implement the projects that would have created savings for us. Additional transport costs, lost income on some of our services, and around construction, delays to construction projects only mean additional cost. And that's the reality of that kind of world. We have, for some of our services as well, additional cost, as I mentioned earlier, because the social distancing requirements require, a different way of operating. Government has offset this with some funding. I've mentioned cycling and walking, the bus work, etc. However, I think it's absolutely fair to say, this is going to be a massive negative, not only in the department's budget, but as members are well aware, across the county council. Just a final point then, we are, as with all other departments across the council, implementing expenditure control, so to make sure that we're absolutely challenging all expenditure given our current financial situation. And at the same time, we're having to deal with significant areas of additional work. So that is a real challenge because, there isn't the money to bring in more resource, etc., like these additional things the government's putting out at the moment. And, so that has been a real challenge for the currently school travel workers, right up there as well in terms of the amount of resource that's taking. And the work that's taken to reconfigure to our business as usual services. My final point would be, I hope I've managed to convey the complexity of what we've dealt with, but actually, under the COVID situation, while it has been challenging for all of us, that, the department has done its best to continue to deliver the services that really we have to keep going out there and the public want us to be delivering by adapting those services as much as we can, as well as taking on the additional work the government's, the whole thing has necessitated. Right, that's me. Thank you very much, Chair.
Bill, you're up first.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. Yes, Park and Ride, Anne. No doubt the Whetstone site is up and running. To what degree, I don't know. But the Bristol site is quite a large site. It's a pity it's out of action because of COVID testing. Couldn't that be moved to one site so actually it could be used again?
Okay, the lease to that is the end of October. However, we are in negotiation with, I want to say it's the Ministry of Defence. Anyway, with government. We're in negotiation with the government with potentially half the site will be testing and half will be park and ride. And we do think that that will be quite workable, as I say, because public transport levels just aren't up there yet. And at least it will begin to get us a toehold back in there. So that's what we're working to. So absolutely take your point. You know, for that part of the city, there is a gap there now, but we are aiming to kind of post the end of October, hopefully get to a point, half the sites for testing, because it has been valuable for the people of Leicestershire. They're not having to go to Nottinghamshire or wherever to have that permanent. I know there's been pop-up testing stations, but to have that permanent kind of regional testing site. So I think the authority is quite keen that we can manage to facilitate that, but acknowledge that, yes, we need to get park and ride back up running. So we're looking at a half and half scenario, but that would be kind of just after the end of October.
Thank you, Anne. You're off, Bill. Bill?
Sorry, the Western side, is that up and running fully yet or not?
Sorry, do you mean the Enderby site?
Sorry, Enderby, yes.
Yes, no, it's fully up and running, yes.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Cheers, Bill. Over to Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. On page 35, paragraph C, it talks about the widening of Kettering Road, Market Harborough, existing cycle lanes. I'm not sort of going to do air quality. I've had 2 days of that. Obviously, my concern is that if we're going to have cycles next to vehicles moving at a pace, are we going to have barriers? How are we going to look at this? The Smart Road project is sort of not gone down favourable with lots of comments that we hear in the media of the danger, because there's nowhere to go now with a car. If you break down, you where do you stop? You go to the traditional area and somebody could run up behind you. Cycling, I think, is fantastic, but are we going to have barriers? How do we perceive this? I know it's in the infancy and we're building this as a project, but obviously one of the things is we've got to try and keep cars and cyclists, have some division, and particularly where lorries are coming, because some of the cyclists will be quite new. Even the older cyclists haven't cycled for years, who are tempted back onto cycle. They've not got that experience yet of working with traffic. Thank you.
No, very good point. I'll start. Maybe Ian's got a bit more detail about that one. The first tranche of that money, I told you, the Department for Transport put out for walking and cycling, for which we got 335,000, was very much, we had to implement it in about 3 weeks. So it was very much temporary measures. So it was kind of coning or lining, that kind of thing. However, this next tranche, government is absolutely clear, it needs to be about more physical measures. So, and it's a bit more money. So that enables us to move towards the segregation, either fully segregated, you know, off-road, etc. So we are moving towards that precisely for the reasons you're saying. I don't know if Ian's got any more detail on the actual Kettering Road. My understanding, it was a bridge and we were putting signals on it to allow enough space for cyclists and vehicles, but Ian will correct me.
Could I just say, Anne, thank you for that. But it wasn't, it was just a highlight in it. It wasn't, Ian, that I really want to know about that particular road. It's so far away from my ward, but it's the emphasis on how we're going to build the future. But not to stop you, Ian.
Just to say, Dan, and Anne's exactly right, and the measures in Harbour are short and we're bringing those in. But one of the things the government has really thrown the challenge down with its new guidance for cycle facilities in particular is they need to be of a much higher standard. They need to be much more robust, as you've described, and really those super highway type features. That's what we're hoping to win future funding for, and that's what we'll talk about in the paper that we come into scrutiny.
Thank you, Ian. James?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of queries, if that's okay. The first one's actually just on the point down from what Dan's just been talking about. It's 30A, although it comes in after the C for some reason. New park and pedal facilities, which were made available at Enderby and Maynolds Gorse park and ride sites. Just clarify what that means. Does that mean that people would drive there and use effectively like a Boris bike situation to go into town, or would just be you cycle there and get the bus in? I was just wondering on that point. I will answer to that first, if that's okay.
Ian?
Sorry, the old button moves around. Yes, so what we're basically doing there is using the existing park and ride sites as park and cycle sites, increasing the amount of storage there. We're also looking at County Hall as well. So you can either drive with your bike on the back of your car and cycle in, or you could cycle there and then get on the services as they go in, depending on your journey.
So it's both, okay. Next question, James.
I see. And just a second. Yeah, thank you. So on page 39, very top of page 39, talking about the resource implications, paragraph 74 starts off. It talks about a reduction in discretionary funding through the removal of, amongst other things, the historic Zoch Bridge. Does that mean that that's now completely on the back burner, and is the current bridge safe enough to go on into the future until such a time as we actually have resources, or what's the situation there, please?
Okay, no, well spotted, thanks. No, and it's probably really useful to clarify that for members. No, it doesn't. What that's talking about is a substitution of funding. So instead of the funding coming from LCC's capital programme, we'll take it from other sources. I mentioned to you earlier that we got additional highways funding this year, and we'll come back with a report about how we'll spend that. But government has indicated they'll do that over the next couple of years, and we'd seek to get the money for Zoch Bridge from that. So it just means that LCC will be funding it. We'll seek for other funding. No, so it's not on the back burner.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Max.
Thanks very much, Alan. Just want to pick up some serious points about what we've been talking about, cycles and road space. If we are going to try and increase the number of people cycling, because public transport is out for many people now, certainly not everybody has a car and so on. But if we're going to do that, the major problem is that people perceive cycling as being dangerous. And you could say the major solution is to make cycling safer. But also, and I think we all know this, that sharing pavement space between cyclists and pedestrians is even more prone to problems now, particularly if there are more cyclists. And as pedestrians, we all are pedestrians one way or another, I guess. Sharing pavements with increasing number of cyclists and scooters is becoming an even bigger problem. I think we probably all understand that. So it is about managing limited road space and making sure that people are safe.
That's a fair point, Max. We also, I think we've taken into consideration there's a number of people now buying electric cycles, and they're pretty quick. Yeah. And they take a little bit more.
Exactly. That's another aspect of the problem. We've got electric cycles, we've got scooters, we've got people trying to walk on pavements, and we've got too many cars on the road. So that's why we employ a very highly skilled set of transport experts to sort it all out for the county.
Oh, you're a charmer, Max. We love you. Okay. Well, listen, we've discussed that to a good conclusion. Thank you so far. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the item 12. I think I'm right. Yes. And that's to do with school transport. So, Anne, over to you again. Great. You've got a glass of water there, haven't you?
It's not actually me for this one. I'm going to let Ian do this one, so I'll just have a wee rest. Thank you, Chair.
Over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And yes, little while ago you asked that we bring, anticipating as we were what might be happening as COVID restrictions were lifted, a report to cover parking outside the school gates, which, as all members will know, is a perennial issue. It doesn't go away, and we have various levels of success or not in dealing with that. The main purpose of the report was to provide an update on the impact of the COVID-19 on school transport, and the directors already talked through some of that at the last update, so I won't reiterate too much. Present the possible interventions to prevent an increase in Schoolgate parking, and also set out what our proposed future approach would be. That saying, that was all got to be done within 6 weeks of the government's announcements of what was going to be happening and various changing criteria and guidance. So it's been a challenging time while we've been doing everything else as well. Basically, as it says there, on the 3rd of July 2020, Secretary of State for Education announced schools would be going back, and then we really had to start trying to fill in the gaps ourselves on how that may look, as we were not getting the guidance immediately and there were lots of questions being asked. But just to put it in context, you know, there are 321 schools in Leicestershire in total, over 100,000 pupils, and trying to reach out to all of those in basically the week before the schools were shutting was rather a difficult task. Rather hampered because over 10 years ago now, much of the support we got from national government around monitoring of school transport and funding was taken away. So we don't have that complete picture of what actually happens in the schools, but there's some data there about what we think goes on the 70 schools we do deal with. So moving down, basically when the schools were set to reopen in September, one thing we did keep making very clear to government, the Department for Education and the Department for Transport, was the Leicester and Leicestershire schools would be the first back, a week ahead or so ahead of many of the other schools in the country. We would need the guidance and we would be starting off very quickly. What the government came back and said was, in some of their messages then that started appearing, was we should be, as it says on paragraph 13 down, promoted to deal with this. What we all knew was going to happen. Lots of people were going to start driving to school, especially those who used to take public transport before. We should be promoting active travel strongly. Basically, we should be encouraging schools to communicate directly with pupils, you know, and as I say, this was all while the schools were shut, and considering whether pupils arriving by other means could be further away dropped off and then walking in. We also had to consider about the additional services, and Anne's talked about that, and we got quite late some additional funding from the Department for Education for the first 6 weeks up until half term to provide extra services, so to make better capacity for those people on buses for the school run, and also engaging with local businesses about how transport around schools, because we know it impacts on community as well. And of course the schools were being asked to look at how they were going to manage the arrival and leaving of pupils as well. But there was an acceptance from the government that there would be an increase in the use of cars. So that's the background of which we started to build a back to school programme. Now, we pretty much picked up there. We do a lot of this already. So we already do an educational behaviour programme, which is all through our Choose How You Move website, which we share with the city and has been going for the last 10 years. We do a vast service provision for entitled children, and we have our other bus services where people can get to and from school. And we also have physical measures and interventions. And I knew this was an area that we get a lot of calls through members, especially this time of year, as people are parking quite randomly outside schools, and a lot of people ask us for physical measures, which we no longer have the budgets for, but we would still get those requests. So bringing you down, what we set out to do starting sort of 5-6 weeks ago, as the government started announcing, was to build a whole back to school programme. So essentially, that back to school programme, sorry, just lost my pace in the report, picked up on all of the work that we do already, but it had to centre around communication. Not only communication out on all the messages to councillors, parish councillors, district councils, the schools themselves, trying to get the message out to parents, local businesses and residents. We've had radio ads going out recently. We've had the outside at all 300 schools in Leicestershire, lamppost banners giving information about social distancing, encouraging walking, cycling and pointing them to where they can communicate. But we also knew we were going to start, as we're getting problems, instead of having those communications coming in from very varied sources, that they could all be fed in and prioritised depending on what needed to be done. So that information has been going out, and I've got to say, we didn't get a national campaign launched until about 4 or 5 days until the Leicester schools were going back. We had been filling all of ours up into the government, and it's surprising how much of what we've developed now looks very much like what the government's put out. So we're quite pleased about that because we've hit the mark quite well. We've been encouraging those behaviour change initiatives and all the good practice that was going on before. We obviously have our school crossing patrol service, which is now fully stood back up outside all the schools. We're really prioritising our camera programme for the camera car going around at the schools where we know we have the big problems, and watching some of the videos of that outside the schools has been quite interesting, and we have caught a number of people, unfortunately, already who are parking on these zigzags. We're also getting the civil enforcement officers out there as well. And of course, what we're doing is we're now getting feedback from members of the public, parents, parish councils, who are feeding into our parish council programme as well, about physical measures they might want to trial in their community from that £1 million we've made available to communities to look at COVID-19 restrictions. So in 6 weeks, we've tried to cover all those things. We do know, given more time, especially more resources from the government, we could have done more, but I think we've had a very comprehensive programme. The feedback from the schools so far has been very good, and they're liking what we've done and they want more of it. The last thing I'd leave you on is, through all of my updates with the Department for Transport over the last few months, I have been asking for more resources to put back dealing and working with schools on school transport and the travel and the school run, because I know how important this is to members. And if we want to get some of the good out of COVID-19, with more people walking, cycling, scooting, then we're going to need to work with them, the schools, the parents, a lot more, and we need the resources to do that. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Just to all members, just part of our briefing this morning, one of the issues we did discuss, and it was brought up by, I think, David and maybe Max as well, is the communication with academies has been difficult. They're not the same as 10 years ago. Academies seem to have a mind of their own. Wherever I've gone throughout the county, and particular in Melton, our relationship communication isn't good. They don't turn up to many of the meetings, and their communication isn't as it was in the past when we had a little bit more say and a bit more control. So, and I know he agrees with that. The academization has affected our ability to communicate and get things done. I'll take the in order because I'm taking things in order as you log on, so I'm trying to keep an eye. So the first, Bill, over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, going back into history, when we started the children age of 10 going to school, so I'm talking back in the 80s, I'm sorry about this, but David Bill will remember this as well as I do, because we know we're the old boys on this game. We had a thing called the Safe Routes to School, because parents are very concerned about these 10-year-old children actually walking to school, getting to school. And a big programme was done that more of the roads and all the crossings made safe for children to go to school. That's sort of been fell by the wayside now. A lot of the crossings now don't have school crossing patrols to them. Well, on Station Road here, there's no school crossing patrol there now anymore. It is pedestrian crossing, but children being children don't always wait for the lights to change and tend to run at the wrong times. And parents feel very concerned about sending children to school when they're considered not a safe route to school. So can we look at the routes to school that the children do take, make sure they are safe, and if put any measures in place to make them more safe to get children to school? Other things like we introduced was the park and stride, where dedicated areas to park so people to walk to school. Then also the walking bus, which seems to have sort of fell by the wayside now. They may say these are all things for the schools to do, but I think as a county we ought to persuade some of the schools to take some of these back up again and make it safe for our children to get to school safely. That would eliminate some of the car journeys. I'm going to say one of the biggest problems is that parents don't feel that children got a safe route to school. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that observation, Bill. I'm sure. Do you want to say a quick word in, because I know you've got some of this in line to do.
As I mentioned already there, a lot of the funding for those sort of programs, which we've put absolutely millions in over the years and built a lot of those rules, went away as the start of the recession that we last had in 2008. We still do encourage the park and stride and all those other initiatives. We do have 100 school crossing patrol sites, which isn't a statutory duty, and the authorities kept, and those are all out there. We get, I'm really pleased that when we look at our accident rates every year, it is an actual, we don't have a safety problem on routes outside schools or to schools. It's very much a perceived problem. And I know Max and I have taught this at the committee many times before. If the perception is there that it's not safe, then that still puts people off, even if there isn't an accident problem. Part of that encouraging and helping is you actually need people out there to actually work with people to do that. And that's where, unfortunately, we've suffered from the resources that have gone. And I've got to say, we're not as in a better position as other authorities I know that have taken away all of their school crossing patrols, all of their working with staff. We've been successful over the last 10 years on accessing Access Fund, Local Sustainable Transport Fund. So we still have a couple of officers who work with schools. But it is small, and that's why I've been lobbying the Department for Transport to get us the resources back, because it takes a lot of interaction, people-wise, to actually work on these things.
Thanks, Ian. Anyway, I think that's answered that quite well. We're going over to David. From the briefing this morning, David did say his past journeys to school safety. He had to get around some cows, cattle, and all sorts. So that was amazing. I quite love that story, David, this morning. Anyway, over to you, David.
Yeah, that's a true story. We and we travelled 20 miles to get to school. But anyway, I forgot what I was going to say now. Oh yes. I'm really backing up what you said, Chairman, at the start. It's our life would be so much easier as county councillors and county officers if we could strengthen the network that we used to have, or renew the network we used to have with all the heads. There was a time, of course, when communication with heads was a regular part of it, in the city and county, and everybody knew what was going on, and messages could be got out very quickly. But sadly, that's gone, as you said. And if we could do anything, if we could learn anything out of this dreadful crisis, it might be that we have to improve the communications with all key players, and that has to include the heads of schools and the chair of governors and so on.
Chair, on that, that's okay. Briefly, we were asked by the Department for Transport, and we used their survey out to schools the week before the schools broke up. As you wouldn't, be surprised, we only got a handful of responses back. We are repeating that survey back out to the schools again now that they're back, to get that better assessment of what they see the problems. And as part of that, we'll try and include how we can better communicate with them. I do know schools get bombarded with lots of messages, and they do like people to feed in only one way, but it is about communication, as you say.
Excellent. Over to Phil. Phil?
Or Les?
Oh, sorry, Les. Sorry. Les. Writing came up and I didn't. Forgive me. Les, forgive me. Jason. Sorry, Les.
No, that's okay. Probably Ian, maybe Anne. It's kind of a sideways question, because a lot of this discussion principally is around modal shift and changing people's behaviour and the type of transport they use. And I'm just curious, because some of this is about how we deal with this moving forward, is Schoolgate Parking, which Ian, you mentioned right at the beginning, is the perennial. Are we hooking into the opportunities that we may or may not have as planning applications come through? And I'm just conscious that, well, I don't know, 2 months ago, DCRB, we approved a new primary school, I think it was, in either Colville or Ashby, forgive me, I can't remember which. And actually, we were asking from the DCRB's perspective about yellow lining outside that school, for that very purpose of keeping the gateways clear and pedestrian access. So I'm just curious, is there a way, or are we hooking all those different elements together and feeding into the planning committee or DCRB? Thanks, Chair.
Chair, can I come back on that? So we can enforce, and we have a big programme now going ahead about the school zigzags, which are right side of the immediate gate. When we've been asked for either single or double yellow lines outside the school gates, the parking inspectorate, when we've given out tickets on those, has made very, very clear statements about the safeguarding of children and the dropping off and giving of those tickets. So actually, the use of double yellow lines and single yellow lines around schools isn't as good a tool as you would think, and we try not to let too many people know that that's what happens. But I think what we've actually got to get into here is, how do we as a society want to treat our most precious things, our school children, as we're travelling through? And I'm sure all members will know, you stand outside a school and watch what happens, you wouldn't think they thought they were so precious. So it's a behavioural society change, I think, that will be very hard to get over, let alone encourage more people to cycle.
All right, thank you for that, Ian. That actually, yeah, that in a big way, that explains quite a lot in a very small sentence. So thank you for that.
Thank you. James.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondered, in terms of encouraging more people to walk, to cycle, run if they're so inclined to do so, to school, whether maybe we could change the emphasis slightly a little bit. And I was thinking in terms of incentives to students to actually use those methods to get to school. Now, I think in some ways there's sort of at least two sort of constituent parts of this. My son started school for the first time on Tuesday. And to be honest with you, he's 4 years old. I'm dropping him off. If I walk, he walks, and it's really down to myself and his mum how he gets to school. But by the time you get to sort of secondary school level, they can start taking their own way there, making their own decisions. I was thinking when I read this, would it be possible to use something along the lines of a Fitbit to feed into how much exercise they've done, how far they've walked, run, either as individuals or as schools, to have almost like a league table, bring in that competitive element to it, and then ultimately maybe to give a prize or prizes to the students that have done the most, to the schools that have done the most to encourage cycling, running, walking to school. And then that would really incentivize them from that point of view to do it. I don't know if the technology exists or whether it's been tried and hasn't worked. I'm not sure. So it's an interesting thought, though.
Can I answer that in a little bit, because it's something that I'm sort of actively involved in, would you believe? I think we need to be careful. My argument is that there's not a school in this country that knows the level of physical activity of the children within the day, not coming to school. So my concern is we're trying to say walking to school gets them fit. They should be fit in the school. There should be more physical activity like there was years ago. And if you go to the private schools, the kids in private schools do physical activity every day, not 1 hour a week, whatever. They also introduced this golden mile. The problem with the golden mile was people walked around for 15 minutes, the kids, while staff stood in the middle. And then some of the children and the staff thought they've done their exercise. So when it came down to the playground play and some of the other physical activity that goes on, they didn't do it because they said, we've done our mile already. I'm sure that makes sense and it resonates because that's human nature. So we've got an issue within the schools, and it's something I do as a research. Scientifically, they don't know the physical activity levels of the children within the school. My concern is we're trying to use getting to school to get kids fit. Well, I'm not sure that's the case. They should be physically active throughout the school day, because that improves confidence, improves their ability to learn, improves handwriting, and improves wellness. So we need to be a little bit careful with this. Don't get me wrong. I mean, when years ago it was great, walking to school and whatever. But the society has changed. It's more busy. There's busier roads, faster cars, etc. But we've still got to put more emphasis on the schools to be providing better physical activity to get the children fit. For me and for all of us, it's getting kids there safe. It's that backlog of horrible vehicles at the front of the gate. We've got a school around the corner, it was featured, I think, with Blake, a Brownlow. You can't get to it. They just park everywhere. It's dangerous. People still drive too fast in when they should slow down. I think those are the major issues regarding the vehicles. But there's still got to be more emphasis on the schools to physically active. Now, these are the stats. Then I'll stop my rant. Children, primary school children, end up at school in the first year is 25% obese. When they leave in the year 6, they're 34 to 35%. So we ain't doing it right, are we? And that hasn't changed. So I still got to be emphasis on the school a lot more. Our emphasis is trying to make access to the schools safer, and a number of ways, not just walking. So can we go on to Dan, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was very interesting to listen to. I've actually stood outside school gates last year on 3 occasions to witness the mad crowd of cars turning up, parents, mainly ladies, jumping out, and they park the car anywhere. Doesn't matter whether it's in front of your drive or anywhere. And I've watched neighbours remonstrate, and they're more or less very rude and not interested. So it is a problem, but it's trying to find a solution to this. And I think staggering school time starts by just half an hour, because I can see there's this intensity. Everybody's got to get through that gate by 9 o'clock. And it's a frenzy there. You just can't believe some of these school entrances, how it is. It's really, if we could emphasise a staggered start of half an hour. So instead of 3:15 or 3:30, it would elongate it, and if they did it one term and then swapped it so it wasn't confusing for people. And we've got to try and find some way, but apparently we never seem to learn, because Les mentioned the school's in Ashby, and it's in my district council ward. So when we sit to look at the planning application, the road's too narrow. We have 12 parking spaces for 14 staff. Nobody could go and visit. And so here we are, we're back to what we're dealing with now, but we're creating a new problem in 2 or 3 years' time. You have somebody saying it's an absolute nightmare. So it's just trying to tackle some of this, but we've got to find its little steps. Whether this staggering of school time would have some impact to make it a little bit easier, I think it's really important. To just say that what the chairman was commenting on, I teach young children in primary schools stranger awareness to how to defend themselves. And it's not that easy getting children. And I wouldn't recommend children walking willy-nilly without proper supervision to school, because we're living in a different world to what us as members grew up in. It's not that same world. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Last question, then back to you, James. Is your hand still up, James? No? No, okay.
Sorry, Chair. No,
that's okay. I just love your enthusiasm. You keep putting your hand up. That's okay. No worries. We'll move on. It is a different world. If we could all press a button now, let's admit it, we'd move all the old schools where they're not accessible, somewhere where people could get to, where we could drop kids off, they could walk safely a distance. But unfortunately, we haven't got the button to press, so we just have to make do. It's a challenge, and we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll keep challenging it. Let's go on to the next agenda item, item 13. And this is on your 88 pages of your agenda. I think, is Simon here?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Thank you. Welcome, Simon. Simon's a customer relations manager. He'll present this. This is to do with the corporate complaints, and does it say compliments annual report, which complements the annual report 219-220. Over to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the first time we've reported to this committee a report on complaints, and ordinarily that this would go into the Scrutiny Commission, but for this year the Commission has asked us to take a report to this group, really to allow for a more detailed discussion of the key themes that affect environment and transport. So before I start, I think it's worth saying that it's been quite a challenging environment for complaints in the last probably 2 to 3 years, and to give a wider context of organisationally, we've seen a 39% increase across all complaints type in the last 3 years. So it's an area of increased demand. That becomes it becomes more pronounced in the last 12 months in our corporate complaints area, which is really all of the non-social care complaint types, and that saw a 22% increase in 2019-20. For environment and transport, as a department, that translated into 231 new complaints, and that's very much in line with that 20% increase from last year's 191. Before I turn to those specific areas that to comment on, I did want to just note that despite that demand increase, the response times to complaints have remained very healthy, and again, particularly for environment and transport as a department, with performance of 90% of those complaints were responded to within 20 days, and just 2 of those that were outside of our policy maximum of 65 working days. So despite that demand increase, we're still very much that commitment from managers to respond timely on a timely basis to complaints is still very much evidence there. The report highlights 3 principal areas for environment and transport where complaints were, where there were quite large numbers of complaints, and I'll just comment briefly on those. So the first one was around transport, and very much focused on special educational needs transport. And really the issues were in a sense quite narrow, very much a pinch point around the return to school in September 2019. And basically, as a result of a pause to that planning, we had a shortened window to process those applications, which unfortunately meant that there were a number where transport wasn't in place at the start of the year. Unsurprisingly, that translated into a number of complaints in that area. So, but quite narrow in terms of what those complaints were about. It was really just around the delay of them being set up. The second area is always a traditional one that will always, just by the nature of it, receive quite high numbers about, and which deals with all things around highways maintenance and repair. So I guess the nature of that will always feature highly. I guess the thing to be clear about, and certainly what the complaints intelligence tells us, that this is much less about those areas of clear safety and risk in the highway. We get very little complaints around what's identified as real safety risks and the repairs that are categorised as priority 1. Those are dealt with very timely, and we hear very little around any quality of repairs. So really, where we do get more complaints is around the programmed work that's perhaps that we can commit less to timescales on, that's competing with other prioritised work, and goes into a melting pot of when we can bundle that up and package that resource in terms of get to those. So I guess the key there is all about expectation management in that area, and how we can do better at that. Certainly in the last 2 years, we've seen really good examples of where that kind of more upfront clarity of message around how we respond, how we work, and some of the limitations in terms of how we can respond has seen real reductions in areas such as traffic calming, traffic management. So for me, I guess if I was to highlight the improvement we can make there, there's still any work that we could do just around that expectation management around those programmed works would be the key there. And the third category that's really coming in volume is around environmental services, and really that's picking up two core areas of drainage and grass cutting are predominantly within that area, and that's probably a good example of where numbers on themselves are not always the only indicator to look at, because actually both of those in isolation 2 to 3 years ago would have featured in my highest sector on their own, and actually both have seen real good progress over the last 2 years in terms of in grass cutting, in terms of the quality of information that's out there that's then preventing complaints. So we've really improved that level of information that's out there around when those cuts are being made and that kind of thing. And in drainage, just really improved. There's been clear improvements in the reliability of the gully maintenance programme that's again helping reduce those complaints. So it's an area that I certainly wouldn't flag as a concern. Actually, I think there's been real positive strides in that area. Again, the nature of the services means you will always receive a reasonable number of complaints, but certainly wouldn't flag it as an issue. I guess just a couple of other things of note to flag, that the continued low numbers of complaints escalating to the local government and social care ombudsman. So they looked at just 7 complaints last year. So that's about 3% of the overall numbers. And given it's a single stage process, that we're doing well at containing those in local resolution and very little going on to the ombudsman. And just one of the decisions they made was a finding of maladministration, really just around some deficiencies in some of the advice and information that we gave out around drop curbs on the application form. So some helpful advice that I know we've now taken forward and changed in those applications. Again, no financial redress payments in there. So quite positive from that aspect in terms of the local resolution, and little going on to the ombudsman remains an area that we do well at. And the final thing I wanted to say, as always, the complaints report also features compliments, and it's important it does, because it helps give balance to some of that work that's going well. And I'm pleased to see that for environment and transport, we picked up a lot more compliments last year. So 69 coming through. That's up from about 22 the year before, I think it was. That's probably simply that we're better at capturing them, if I'm honest, than necessary. There may well have been a slight increase. It's hard to say for sure, but certainly we're more diligent at capturing those. And it's important that those are added to give context to the wider annual reports that are produced. I think that's the key messages I wanted to give, Chair, so I'll pause there for any questions.
Thank you, Simon. I wish you was going to say, of course, the compliments was due to such an excellent scrutiny committee and the good members there, but you didn't throw that one in then, eh? Any questions? It's quite a standard report. We understand the importance of managing it. I'm very happy that the response time, that's the key thing, that we're responding within that time. That's great. I do get compliments as well on some of the way we've handled the service, the booking system where you give a reference, which is fabulous, that we can follow it up. So in general, my experience has always been, Simon, very positive in most cases. I think if there's, Mr. Hunt, Max, over to you.
No, just to add a quick word to exactly what you've said, Chair. I think the reason why it's working so well, in fact, better than many of the systems I see around of contact handling, is because it's managed, and it's managed very well. And I'd like to thank the officer for all that background work that we don't often see.
Thank you, Max. Okay, we'll move on. Item 14, the next meeting will be the 5th of November, which is bonfire night, so it'll be a cracker. And then there's other dates where we set the agenda, and so we invite you to the meeting. There's no urgent items. I'd like to thank you all and congratulate you all for an excellent meeting. It's 2 hours, which I think is good stuff. Some good comments. I really appreciate your support and input. Look forward to seeing you all shortly. I now close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye. Bye.